All right, so are you ready to like take a trip back in time with me? Because
Wow.
today we're diving deep into 1965,
Oh, yeah.
a year that like totally revolutionized the music scene.
Yeah.
Think about it. British invasion, Motown magic, folk going electric. It
Mm.
was like a total explosion of creativity.
Mm.
I mean, you had the Beatles like at their absolute peak,
Right.
Bob Dylan just like shaking things up,
Yeah.
and a whole host of other just incredible artists
Yeah.
making their mark.
What's so captivating about 1965 to me is that it wasn't just like about hit songs.
Right.
It was about a major cultural shift. Artists were becoming more than just entertainers. They were becoming the voice of a generation. They were tackling social issues head on and experimenting with sounds that just redefine what popular music could be.
It's like the whole world was just buzzing with this energy of change, right?
Absolutely.
And to think the ripples of that revolution are still felt in the music we listen to today.
Oh, yeah.
So are you ready to step into our time machine and experience 1965 firsthand?
I am. Let's start with January 1965. The year kicked off with this incredible burst of creative energy. The Beatles, already global superstars, hit #1 with I Feel Fine,
Oh, yeah.
a track that actually features one of the earliest uses of guitar feedback in popular music.
Wow, talk about a hint of the sonic rebellion that was to come. But it wasn't just about the big names.
Right.
The Zombies were also making waves with their unique, kind of dreamy sound.
See?
She's Not There. Such a catchy tune, and they were captivating audiences on TV shows like Shindig.
Oh,
You could
yeah.
really see the British invasion taking hold.
And it wasn't just limited to like a couple of bands. The British music scene was overflowing with talent. The Rolling Stones were laying down their gritty blues rock with Heart of Stone. The Kinks were bringing that raw energy with All Day and All the Night. Even a young Marianne Faithfull was making an impact with her melancholic ballad, As Tears Go By.
It was a British takeover for sure. And it wasn't just the guys either.
Right.
Remember Petula Clark?
Oh, yeah.
She became the first British female vocalist since the Beatles to top the U.S. charts with Downtown. It was a global smash, proving that music could truly transcend borders.
And if you look at like the sheer volume of albums released in January alone,
Yeah.
you get a real sense of the era's energy. The Rolling Stones released Numb 2, Ray Charles had a live album out, the Zombies had their own live recording, even Odetta was singing Bob Dylan.
Wow.
It was a period of non-stop artistic output.
Can you imagine being a music fan back then? It
Oh,
must have been incredible.
I know.
And while the music scene was changing, so was the fashion.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember the mod scene?
The mod scene was all about embracing a new, modern aesthetic. Think sharp suits, miniskirts, bold colors. It was a visual expression of the cultural shift happening all around.
It's like everything was evolving from the music to the fashion. Even society itself. I mean, this was the year of the first American spacewalk.
Exactly. The world was pushing boundaries in every direction, and that spirit of innovation was definitely reflected in the music. Speaking of pushing boundaries, Bob Dylan was about to make a move that would send shockwaves through the folk world.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really interesting.
Right.
His album, Bringing It All Back Home, dropped in March. And it wasn't what anyone expected.
Dylan started incorporating electric guitars into his music, blurring the lines between folk and rock. This caused a lot of controversy at the time, with some folk purists feeling like he'd betrayed the genre.
It must have been a wild time to be a Dylan fan. You're either on board with the new sound or feeling totally alienated by it.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's a perfect example of how artists were pushing boundaries and challenging expectations. But Dylan wasn't deterred. He was evolving, his lyrics becoming more complex, more poetic, and increasingly tackling social and political issues.
He went from protest singer to something much deeper, like a poet-philosopher. And you can't deny the influence he had.
Yep.
His transformation impacted the entire music scene. Artists started seeing themselves as more than just entertainers.
Yeah.
They were becoming cultural commentators.
Think about Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. The lyrics were full of social commentary and vivid imagery, and the video with Dylan flipping through cue cards became an iconic symbol of the era.
And let's not forget the impact of that electric guitar. It was like a lightning bolt through the music world, influencing everyone from the Beatles to the emerging folk rock scene in California.
It's fascinating how Dylan's musical evolution coincided with major scientific advancements, like NASA sending astronauts on spacewalks. It was a period of rapid change and innovation across the board.
Right. It's like the world was collectively saying, let's try new things and see what happens. But while Dylan was electrifying the folk scene, another musical force was giving us pure soul. The Temptations released My Girl that same year, a song that became an instant classic.
My Girl is timeless. It perfectly captures the feeling of love and devotion. It reminds us that even in times of change, some things like the power of love remain constant.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It was this mix of the personal and the political that really defined the spring of '65. You had songs about love and heartbreak, everyday experiences,
Yeah.
but also songs that reflected the growing concerns about war, social justice, and the changing world.
Music was becoming a mirror reflecting the complexities of life. Take the Beatles' Help or the Animals' We Gotta Get Out of This Place.
Right.
They perfectly captured the anxieties and uncertainties of the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just about singles anymore. The concept album was also on the rise. Artists weren't just putting out collections of songs. They were crafting stories, experimenting with different sounds and themes, creating cohesive artistic statements.
The Beatles' Rubber Soul, which they began recording in November, is a perfect example of this. It marked a turning point for them and for rock music as a whole. The introspective lyrics and innovative instrumentation were truly groundbreaking.
You know, it's crazy to think that while the Beatles were recording Rubber Soul, a young Jimi Hendrix was playing backup for Little Richard and his band, the Upsetters. Talk about a musical crossroads.
It's mind-blowing when you realize that all these future legends were part of the same musical ecosystem, each contributing to the rich tapestry of 1965.
It was a year overflowing with talent, and we're just getting started. Remember, all of this happened before summer even hit. 1965 was like a non-stop whirlwind of creativity.
And this musical revolution wasn't confined to recording studios.
Right.
It was exploding onto the streets, into the clubs, onto television screens.
Yeah.
Live music was becoming a vital part of the culture.
Speaking of live music,
Mm.
are you ready for a trip to Shea Stadium?
Oh, yeah. Picture this. August 15th, 1965, Shea Stadium.
Right.
A venue usually filled with baseball fans.
Right.
Packed with over 55,000 screaming fans. For a concert that would change music history forever.
That's right. We're talking about the Beatles at Shea Stadium. This wasn't just a concert.
Yeah.
It was a full-blown cultural phenomenon.
It really was.
The roar of the crowd was deafening. You could practically feel the ground shake.
It was a pivotal moment. The Beatles at Shea Stadium proved that rock bands could fill stadiums, paving the way for the massive arena tours that we see today.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine the courage it took for them to perform amidst that sea of screaming fans.
Right.
They could barely hear themselves play.
They were true pioneers, pushing the boundaries of what a live performance could be. And think about this. It was one of the first concerts to be filmed and broadcast internationally.
Oh.
It solidified their status as global icons, not just musicians, but cultural ambassadors for the British invasion.
Meanwhile, away from the frenzy of Beatlemania, other artists were making their mark on the summer of '65. Sonny and Cher's I Got You Babe topped the charts, becoming the anthem for young love that summer.
It was the perfect summer song, capturing the optimism and carefree spirit of the time. But as you said earlier, 1965 wasn't all sunshine and roses.
No.
There was a darker side to the music as well.
Exactly. Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction gave voice to the growing anxieties about war, social injustice, and the threat of nuclear annihilation. It was a stark contrast to the more lighthearted pop hits of the time.
It was a powerful reminder that even as the music scene was exploding with creativity, the world was grappling with some very serious issues. It was a year of contrasts, of hope and uncertainty, all reflected in the music.
And as summer gave way to fall, Bob Dylan continued to challenge the status quo.
Yes.
His performance at the Newport Folk Festival in July 1965 became one of the most talked about events of the year.
This is the infamous night Dylan went electric.
Yes.
He traded his acoustic guitar for a Fender Stratocaster, unleashing a raw energy that divided the audience. Some people loved it.
Right.
Others felt betrayed, but no one could deny the sheer power of his performance.
It was a defining moment in Dylan's career and a turning point in folk music. It sparked debates about the evolution of the genre and the role of artists in reflecting the changing times.
From that moment on, he wasn't just a folk icon. He was a rock innovator. And his musical exploration didn't stop there. Just a month later, he released Highway 61 Revisited,
Right.
an album that fully embraced his new electric sound.
Highway 61 Revisited is considered a masterpiece by many. It showcased Dylan's poetic genius and his willingness to experiment with new sounds. And then there's like a Rolling Stone, an anthem for a generation challenging societal norms and celebrating individuality.
And while Dylan was revolutionizing folk rock, the Rolling Stones were cementing their reputation as the ultimate bad boys of rock and roll.
Yes.
Satisfaction was a global hit, capturing the frustration and restlessness of youth with its rebellious lyrics and driving guitar riff.
The Rolling Stones provided a raw, rebellious counterpoint to the more polished sound of the Beatles.
Yeah.
They channeled a primal energy that challenged authority and embraced the darker side of rock and roll. It was a potent combination that resonated with a generation eager to break free from convention.
And let's not forget The Who. They burst onto the scene that year with My Generation.
Yeah.
That anthem with its iconic line, I hope I die before I get old, captured the rebellious spirit of youth like no other song.
The Who's sound was a force of nature, raw, energetic, and totally unique. They blended rock pop and even opera, creating a sonic experience that was both thrilling and unpredictable.
And their live performances were legendary. Pete Townshend's windmill guitar swings and Roger Daltrey's microphone twirling became iconic images of the era.
They weren't just musicians. They were performers, pushing the boundaries of stagecraft and visual spectacle. Their impact on rock music is still felt today.
So as we head into the final stretch of 1965, the music scene is a whirlwind of innovation and raw energy. The lines between genres are blurring, artists are becoming cultural commentators,
Right.
and the world is eagerly anticipating the next sonic breakthrough.
And speaking of breakthroughs, the Beatles were hard at work in the studio crafting what would become one of their most influential albums,
Oh yeah.
one that truly cemented 1965 as a turning point in music history.
Wait, we can't forget about Rubber Soul. By December, they'd wrapped a recording on it, and it was a clear departure from their earlier work. It felt different, more mature, more introspective than their previous albums.
It was an evolution. Think about the sonic diversity on that album.
Yeah.
You hear folk influences in Norwegian wood, a touch of psychedelia in Nowhere Man, and even a sitar. It was pretty groundbreaking for a pop album at the time.
That sitar on Norwegian wood is such a standout moment. It's not just a cool sound. It reflects a broader cultural trend at the time. You know, there was this growing fascination with Eastern spirituality and music, especially within the counterculture movement. It was like they were seeking something beyond the traditional Western norms.
Exactly. And the lyrics on Rubber Soul were equally groundbreaking. They explored themes of love, loss, and identity.
Yeah.
There's a depth and complexity there that reflected the changing world around them.
Rubber Soul still resonates with listeners today,
Right.
which speaks volumes about its lasting power. But the Beatles weren't the only ones releasing game-changing music that December. Over in the UK, the Rolling Stones dropped Out of Our Heads,
Right.
an album that solidified their bad boy image.
Out of Our Heads was a raw mix of blues covers and original songs that showcased Mick Jagger's increasingly confident vocals. Tracks like The Last Time and Play with Fire hinted at the darker, more rebellious direction their music would take in the years to come.
They were really carving out their own space in the rock and roll landscape. And then there was The Who released their debut album, My Generation, that same month.
Yeah.
What a sonic explosion. It perfectly captured the energy and angst of youth culture.
My Generation was a landmark album. It showcased Pete Townshend's brilliant songwriting, Roger Daltrey's powerful vocals, and the band's raw energy. Songs like The Kids Are All Right and the title track My Generation became anthems for a generation that felt disillusioned with the status quo.
It was a voice of rebellion, a call for change.
Yeah.
And it resonated deeply with young people at the time. And we can't forget about some of the other incredible music that came out that December.
Of course, Otis Redding released his soulful masterpiece, Otis Blue. It was a stunning collection of blues and R&B that showcased his incredible vocal range. And for those who preferred a more introspective sound, there was Joan Baez's Farewell Angelina.
Right.
It was a hauntingly beautiful folk album that explored themes of love, loss, and social justice.
It's amazing to think that all of this incredible music was released in just 1 month. December 1965 was a sonic feast, a fitting end to a year that truly transformed popular music.
When you look back, it's clear that 1965 wasn't just about catchy tunes. It was a year of cultural shifts, a year when music became more than just entertainment.
Yeah.
It became a powerful voice for a generation grappling with change, uncertainty, and the desire for something more.
It's fascinating how the music of 1965 reflected the dreams, the anxieties, and the rebellious spirit of a world on the verge of transformation. And its influence can still be heard in the music we listen to today.
It makes you wonder what artist or album from 1965 resonates most with you, and how do you think the legacy of that year has shaped the music we hear today?
That's a great question for our listeners to ponder. As you explore the music of 1965, you might discover hidden gems, forgotten tracks that speak to you in unexpected ways. That's the beauty of music. There's always something new to discover, even in the echoes of the past. Until next time, Keep those turntables spinning and those ears open to the sounds of musical revolution.